The day Ophelia Carter got fired, she didn't even get to finish her coffee. She was halfway through her second sip when the glass doors of the open-floor office slid open and in walked the new owner of Whitmore and Lane, her marketing firm. He was tall, sharp-jawed, dressed in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than her car, and he looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade. Sebastian Whitlow. She'd only heard whispers he was a millionaire investor from New York who bought out struggling companies, gutted them, and tripled their value. Ruthless, brilliant, and completely heartless. And now he owned the company she'd poured 5 years of her life into. "Everyone 10 minutes, he announced. His voice cut through the room like ice water. Conference room. Ophelia's stomach dropped. She stood slowly, glancing at the other employees, who looked just as nervous. They filed into the glass-walled conference room like school kids heading to detention. Sebastian stood at the head of the table, flipping through a thin folder. "Let's not waste time," he said. "This company is bleeding money. Effective immediately, several positions are being eliminated." There was a pause. Then he looked up, straight at her. "Ophelia Carter, copy director. Your role is no longer essential." Her breath left her body. "Excuse me? I said your position is terminated. You'll receive severance, and—" "You've never even seen my work," she said, her voice rising. "You don't know what I do here. I know enough to know your department hasn't produced ROI in over a year. It's not personal. It feels personal. Then you're too emotional for this job." He turned his back before she could say anything else. By the time she got back to her desk, her company email was already disabled. 2 weeks later, Ophelia was walking dogs in the Upper West Side and trying not to cry in public. She didn't have rich parents. No backup plan. She'd been scraping together rent with odd gigs and still couldn't sleep without thinking of how he'd looked her dead in the eye and called her non-essential. So when her best friend dragged her to a networking benefit at the Metropolitan rooftop, she had nothing left to lose. "You said this was casual," Ophelia hissed under her breath, pulling at the hem of her black dress. "It is. Casual for billionaires." Her friend winked. "You belong here." She didn't feel like she did. Not with the diamond earrings and champagne towers and women who floated through the room like they were born in heels. And then just her luck, he walked in. Sebastian Whitlow. In a charcoal suit, again. Flanked by 2 security guards and a board member. Of course he was here. Of course. Her friend noticed her stiffen. "Is that him?" "Yeah." "The guy who fired you in front of the whole office?" "Yep. Let's key his car." Tempting. She tried to avoid him. Truly. She kept her head down, sipped her drink, and stayed far from the main circle until a waiter tripped over his own feet and spilled a full glass of red wine down the front of her dress. She gasped. "Oh my God, I'm so—" "It's fine," she said quickly, though her chest was soaked and the thin fabric clung to her. Humiliation burned her skin. And that's when she heard his voice. "Ophelia?" She turned. Sebastian stood a few feet away, eyebrows raised. "Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be wearing Merlot." He blinked, then strangely laughed. A real, surprised sound. It caught her off guard. "You're still funny," he said. "You're still heartless." He studied her. "Can I get you a towel?" "I don't need anything from you." Except, apparently, she did. The dress was too ruined to stay, and her friend had disappeared. She was stuck, shivering on the rooftop, when he reappeared with a clean black blazer in his hand. "Just take it," he said, pushing it toward her. She hesitated, then took it. It was warm. It smelled like cedarwood and something expensive. "You look cold," he added. "You think—" He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer. "Why are you here?" "Trying to find a new job. Unless you're here to fire me again." He didn't laugh that time. "I didn't want to let you go, you know." She frowned. "Then why did you?" "Because I don't mix business with chaos." "You were."
distracting.
What does that even mean? Sebastian's eyes didn't leave hers. It means I noticed you. And that's dangerous when you're supposed to be objective. She blinked. So instead of asking me out, you fired me? He ran a hand through his hair. It was a mistake. $1 million mistake? She asked bitterly. No, his voice was low. A personal one. There was a pause.
Heavy.
Electric. You want to get out of here? He asked. She stared at him. Are you serious? I know I don't deserve it. But give me one night. One night.
She should have said no.
But something in his tone, raw, unguarded, unraveled her.
Fine, she said.
They ended up in the back of a Blacktown car, driving toward the river. He took her to a quiet rooftop restaurant that overlooked the city skyline. No press. No board members. Just them. You didn't really fire me because I was distracting, she said, picking at her salad. That's ridiculous. He looked at her across the candlelight. You had this way of looking at me, like you saw through everything. I hated it. Why? Because you made me feel something, and I didn't want to. She swallowed. You're not heartless, are you? He didn't speak for a beat. Then he said quietly, only when I'm afraid. The conversation shifted. They talked for hours. About everything. Her childhood in Georgia. His years building companies from scratch. Her dreams of starting her own agency. His parents' divorce. Her love for old movies. His fear of ending up alone. When he drove her home, he didn't try anything. Just walked her upstairs and stood in the hallway. I know I don't deserve to ask, he said, but can I see you again? She hesitated, then nodded. The next morning, she woke up to a knock at her door. She opened it and froze. Sebastian was standing there in a black coat, holding a single silver box. I couldn't sleep, he said, so I drove around until the stores opened. She opened the box. Inside was a new dress. Midnight blue. Soft silk. I wanted to replace the one you lost, he said. And I want to fix things. Sebastian. I know this is insane. But last night, I felt something I haven't felt in years. I don't want to play games. I don't want to lose you again. Her heart was pounding. He stepped closer, his voice low. One night with you wasn't enough. I want forever. And then he dropped to one knee. She gasped. What are you doing? He pulled out a ring box. I don't care if it's too fast. I don't care if I look insane. I just know I've spent years building an empire, and I've never wanted a single moment of it until now. Until you. Her hands flew to her mouth. Be my wife, Ophelia. She stared at him. The man who'd fired her. The man who'd broken every rule. The man who, against all logic, had just offered her everything. Yes, she whispered. Yes. He stood, wrapped her in his arms, and kissed her like the world had just started spinning again. And maybe for the first time it had. Ophelia sat in the back seat of the black SUV, staring down at the diamond on her finger. The city moved around her in blurs, crosswalks, and headlights, steam rising from manholes, but she didn't see any of it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held them in her lap, the weight of the ring unfamiliar. Sebastian sat beside her, silent. His hand rested on the space between them, not quite reaching for hers. The silence stretched, dense and strange. You didn't even ask if I wanted coffee first, she said without looking at him. He turned his head slowly. Would that have made this more reasonable? No, she said. But it would have made it human. He gave a small sigh and looked out the window. They arrived at a tall glass building on Park Avenue. Not the office where he'd once fired her. This one was taller, sleeker. Security waved them through without question. They took a private elevator that moved so fast her ears popped. When the doors opened, Ophelia stepped into a penthouse office that felt more like a sanctuary than a workspace. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline in full. A long desk of polished walnut stood near the center, and behind it, strangely out of place, stood a vase of wildflowers. "Did you bring me here to impress me?" she asked. "No," he said. "I brought you here because I don't know how to do this any other way." She turned to face him. "Do what, Sebastian?" He closed the distance between them. "Build something that's not numbers. That doesn't come with projections or quarterly targets. You're the first thing I've wanted that I can't fix with a spreadsheet." "I don't need a penthouse or a ring to believe you," she said. "I need to know you're not doing this because you're afraid I'll walk away." "I am afraid," he said. "And that's the exact reason I'm not letting you." She studied him. "There's a difference between fear and love."
He didn't argue.
Instead, he walked to the desk and pulled out a folder. "I had my legal team draft something." She crossed her arms. "Already? I don't know how to go slow, Ophelia. But I want to do this right." She opened the folder. Inside was a marriage agreement, terms, stipulations, and at the bottom, her name typed neatly beside his. Her hand hovered above the paper. "You want us to sign a contract?" "I want to give you protection," he said. "It's not about control. It's about certainty." She looked up. "If you're trying to buy my consent, it won't work." "I know that. You told me last night you didn't mix business with chaos." "Why am I suddenly the exception?" "Because you walked into my life and dismantled every rule I thought kept me safe. And for the first time, I don't want safety." She closed the folder softly. "Give me a week. 1 week to think. If you still feel the same, I'll sign it." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. 1 week. As she turned to leave, he caught her wrist gently. "Come back for dinner tonight."
No papers.
"No pressure. Just us." She hesitated, then nodded once. When she stepped into the elevator, the doors closed on his face, and for the first time in days, she could finally breathe. That evening, she stood outside his brownstone in Tribeca, her knuckles cold against the early spring air. The street was quiet, lined with trees just starting to bud. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. She wasn't ready to explain yet. The door opened before she knocked. Sebastian stood there in a gray Henley and dark jeans, barefoot, holding a dish towel. It was the most human she'd ever seen him. "You cook?" she asked, stepping inside. "I reheat," he said. "But I ordered from the good Thai place in Brooklyn, not the watered-down one near Midtown." She followed him through the warm-lit living room and into the open kitchen, where 2 plates were already set. "You live alone?" "Always have." She glanced around. "It doesn't feel lived in." "I don't stay in one place long enough to leave a mark." She sat down. "Maybe that's the problem." They ate in near silence for a few minutes until she set down her fork. "What happened to you?" she asked softly. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "You built this empire, this life, and you walk through it like you're always waiting for the floor to collapse. What happened?" He leaned back, his fingers tightening slightly around his glass. "My father walked out when I was 12. Left a note and an overdraft account. My mother worked 3 jobs and still cried at the mailbox every month. I promised myself I'd never be at anyone's mercy again." She didn't interrupt. "So I built walls. And then I built companies. And now I'm here, with everything I thought I wanted." "And still afraid," she said. He looked down.
Yes.
"Still afraid." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You can't build a life with someone if you're still fighting ghosts." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "You make me want to fight them," he said. They cleared the plates in silence. Later, they stood in front of the long window in his living room, watching the city lights pulse below them. "I don't need a legal agreement," she said quietly. "I need you to show up when it's hard. I need you to not disappear when I ask a hard question." "I won't," he said. "I need to know this isn't about guilt." "It's not." She turned to him. "Then prove it." He stepped closer.
How?
"Let me build something with you. Not just a marriage. A future. Something that's ours. His voice dropped. Tell me what you want. I want to start my own agency, she said. I want to build something from the ground up, with people who believe in purpose, not just profit. He didn't blink. Then I'll fund it. No, she said firmly. You'll invest. Like anyone else. But I run it. I choose the team. I choose the mission. He nodded slowly. And when it's built? Then maybe I'll be ready to build a life with you. A long silence passed between them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring she'd given back earlier. I'll keep this, he said. Until you ask for it back. She looked at him, then reached out and closed his fingers around the box. Then don't lose it. That night, she left without him insisting. He didn't try to follow. He didn't try to kiss her. He just stood at the door, watching her go, and for the first time, she saw something behind his eyes that looked like hope. 3 days later, she signed a lease on a tiny second-floor office in Soho with exposed brick and terrible plumbing. But it was hers. By the end of the week, she'd chosen a name. Elysian Works. A place for stories, branding, purpose-driven campaigns. Her kind of work. Sebastian didn't call. He didn't show up unannounced. He waited. Until the 8th day. He knocked on the glass door of her office, holding a plain white box. Inside was a brass plaque that read, Elysian Works founded by Ophelia Carter. She looked up at him. I was wrong, he said. One night wasn't enough. But a lifetime doesn't scare me anymore. She stepped toward him. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached into the top drawer of her desk, pulled out the ring, and set it gently in his hand. If we do this, she said, we do it as equals. No contracts, he said. No fear, she added. He nodded. Only truth. She nodded once, then held out her hand. He slid the ring back onto her finger. And this time, neither of them looked away. Ophelia Carter didn't expect to wake up nauseous on the same morning she had her first investor pitch. She didn't expect to be pacing the bathroom floor of her Soho studio office, trying not to throw up between sips of ginger tea, while her body trembled with some strange mix of adrenaline and dread. She blamed nerves. She hadn't eaten much the night before, too focused on refining her presentation deck for the 3 VC partners flying in from Chicago. She'd barely slept, but the queasiness didn't pass. By noon, she was gripping the edge of the sink, pale and breathless, when it finally dawned on her.
No.
She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, pulled out the small calendar she barely used, and counted.
Twice.
Then once more slower, just to be sure. She sat back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, the city noise bleeding through the windows. Her breath came shallow. Her hands pressed flat against her stomach. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not today. But it was. And there was a second heartbeat inside her to prove it. Ophelia took 2 hours before she picked up the phone. Not to call Sebastian. Not yet. She called the only person who knew her before ambition, before heartbreak, before Manhattan had hardened her edges. Her older sister, Eden. You're pregnant, Eden said, her voice flat. Ophelia pressed her forehead to the window pane, eyes shut. I didn't plan this. Obviously. There was a long pause. Is he going to react like a human being, or like the man who fired you without blinking? I don't know. You're going to have to find out. Ophelia didn't respond. Sweetheart, Eden added, softer now. You don't get to protect him from this. It's not about his readiness. It's about yours. Later that night, she stood outside Sebastian's brownstone again, but this time she didn't hesitate. She knocked once, and the door opened before her hand dropped. His eyes widened as he saw her, but he didn't speak, just stepped aside to let her in. She walked in, heart pounding, and turned to face him. I need you to sit down. He didn't question her. Just moved to the couch and waited, his elbows resting on his knees, watching her like She was about to detonate something sacred. She stayed standing. I'm pregnant. The words were blunt.
No preamble. No softening.
Sebastian didn't move. Didn't blink. Seconds passed.
More.
Then he stood slowly and walked past her, toward the kitchen. She turned sharply. That's it. He opened a cabinet, pulled out a glass, and poured water from a bottle with deliberate calm. I'm making sure I heard you correctly, he said. You did. He drank, then set the glass down, his movements calculated, too slow. You're pregnant. Yes. He looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not panic. Not anger.
Fear.
Not the kind that made him run. The kind that made him freeze. Are you okay? He asked, voice low. I am now. She waited. Sebastian walked back into the living room, still saying nothing, and sat again. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him. Jaw tense. Are you keeping it? She didn't answer immediately. I'm not asking you for permission, she said. But yes, I am. He nodded once. Okay. Silence fell again, thick enough to suffocate. I didn't tell you to trap you, she said. I know. I didn't tell you to change anything. I know, he repeated. I'm telling you because it's your child, and you deserve to know. He looked up at her. And then, finally, he said something real. I don't know how to be a father. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Neither do I know how to be a mother. But we're going to become one either way. He exhaled, a sound that came from someplace deep. Then he leaned forward. I need to be clear with you. She braced herself. I'm not going to run. She blinked. I don't want to be the kind of man who disappears when it matters most. I already made that mistake with you once. I'm not making it again. Her throat tightened. What does that mean? She asked. It means, he said, we get married. Not because of the baby, but because I should have already been standing beside you. Her eyes closed for a second. No contracts. No contracts, he agreed. No games. Only truth. He stood again and crossed the room. You said we build a future together, he said. This is part of it. She looked at him, and something in her chest cracked open. I won't be rescued, she said. I'm not that girl. I'm not here to rescue you, he said. I'm here to walk beside you. She didn't speak, just stood slowly, walked to him, and rested her forehead against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in days, she let herself cry. The next morning, she woke up in his bed, sunlight pouring through the linen curtains. Sebastian was already gone, but a note lay on the pillow beside her. Doctor's appointment.
10 o'clock.
I'll be there.
He was.
They sat side by side in the dim exam room, the scent of antiseptic and lavender clashing somewhere between sterile and soft. The technician moved the wand across her abdomen, and then the screen lit up. She heard it before she saw it. A heartbeat.
No. 2.
The technician smiled. Looks like you're having twins. Ophelia stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. Sebastian didn't speak, didn't move. Then, after a long pause, his fingers found hers. I've built my life on controlling outcomes, he said quietly. But this changes everything. Later, in the elevator, she finally looked at him. Are you afraid? He nodded. Yes. Me too. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. Not a ring.
Keys.
To the house in Vermont, he said. She frowned. What? It's quiet. Private. A place to think.
To plan.
To breathe. She took the keys slowly. You're giving me a house? I'm giving you space.
Safety.
Time. She closed her hand around them. Come with me. He didn't hesitate. They arrived at the house 2 nights later. It sat on a hill, surrounded by tall pine and soft wind. A porch wrapped around the front. Inside, the rooms were warm with old wood and clean linens.
No marble.
No silver. Just air that smelled like firewood and peace. They didn't talk about the company, or the pregnancy, or the future. They made tea, sat by the window, watched the trees move, and for the first time, they let the silence be enough. Ophelia woke up one morning to him standing on the porch, barefoot, holding a notebook. He was writing something. She watched him from inside, not moving. When he came back in, she asked, "What are you writing?" He handed it to her. Inside, in his sharp, slanted handwriting, were the words,
For them.
"For you, for the man I want to become." She closed the book and kissed him like she believed every word, because for the first time she did. The day the letter arrived, Ophelia was standing barefoot in the Vermont kitchen, stirring honey into a chipped mug of chamomile when Sebastian dropped the envelope on the counter between them. She glanced at it, then back at him. "That's not your usual white glove courier." He didn't answer right away. The envelope was heavy, the kind made for legal documents, with a seal on the back she didn't recognize. Her hand froze near the handle of the kettle. "What is this?" she asked. "It's from the board," he said, his voice low. She didn't move. "Your board?" He nodded. "They want a meeting." "In person." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." She set the mug down. "You're not going." "I have to." "You don't." He stepped closer. "There's more." She crossed her arms. "They know about us. About the pregnancy." She blinked.
How?
Sebastian looked away, jaw tight. "My CFO's assistant overheard a call I made to the medical office. I didn't think. You didn't think anyone would ever hear you admit you care about something."
He didn't argue.
Ophelia picked up the envelope and turned it over in her hand. "They think I'm a liability. They think I'm distracted." She looked at him, something sharper behind her gaze. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. "And I don't regret that."
She didn't respond.
Just walked past him, out into the hallway, her footsteps soft against the worn wooden floor. He followed. "Ophelia, you built your career on being untouchable," she said, not turning around. "So now that someone's touched you, they're circling like vultures. I'll handle it." She turned.
How?
"I'll go to New York. I'll make it clear the company's direction hasn't changed. That I'm still in control." "You're not," she said quietly. "And you know it."
He didn't speak.
"I'm not ashamed of what we are," she added. "But if you're going to fight for us, don't do it in a boardroom. Do it in your life." The next morning, he left before sunrise. Ophelia stood on the front porch, arms wrapped around her midsection, watching the black SUV disappear down the gravel road. The trees were still, the sky pale and open, and for the first time since coming to the house, she felt alone. 2 hours later, she was in the nursery room, painting the far wall a soft amber. She didn't know why she'd picked that color. It wasn't on any mood board, but it felt like morning light, like new beginnings, and her hands needed something to do. The phone rang just after noon. She wiped her fingers with a towel and answered. "Hello." It was Eden. Her voice came fast, urgent. "Are you near a TV?"
No.
"Turn on the news." Ophelia ran to the small living room, fumbled with the remote, and flipped to the first channel she could find. A press conference was airing live. Midtown Manhattan. The steps of Whitlow Global. Cameras flashing. Sebastian stood at the podium. She dropped into the armchair, hands trembling. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a charcoal coat, open, wind tugging at his hair. His expression was unreadable, but his voice measured and clear. "For 10 years," he said, "I've built this company on precision, speed, and isolation. I believed emotional detachment was a strength. I now understand it was a weakness." Photographers called out his name, but he didn't flinch. "Recent changes in my personal life have revealed something I've ignored for too long. The human cost of leadership. The value of presence." and the necessity of building legacy not just through profit, but through people. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He continued, "I've requested a temporary restructuring of executive duties. Effective immediately, I'll be taking a leave of absence to focus on founding a new division, one centered on ethical innovation and community rebuilding. I'll be relocating permanently to Vermont, where this work will begin." Ophelia's hand flew to her chest. Sebastian's gaze didn't waver as he finished. "I've spent years fearing vulnerability. But now, I'm building a life with someone who teaches me that strength begins with truth. And I choose that truth.
Publicly.
Permanently." He stepped back from the podium, ignoring the swarm of questions, and walked straight into the building without another word. Ophelia sat frozen, the TV flickering in the background. The next call came an hour later. It wasn't Sebastian. It was Whitlow Global's head of legal affairs. "We have a situation," the woman said, her tone clipped. Mr. Whitlow's announcement caused a plunge in investor confidence. "The board is threatening to force a full buyout unless he reconsiders. We need you to convince him to walk back his statement." Ophelia gripped the edge of the sofa. "You think I can talk him out of telling the truth? You're about to be his wife. If he listens to anyone, it's you." She hung up without answering. That night, she heard the front door open. She didn't get up. She stayed seated in the nursery, paintbrush still in hand, watching the wall dry. His footsteps were slow, hesitant. He appeared in the doorway.
His coat was damp.
His eyes exhausted. "I saw it," she said. He looked at her, silent. "You stood in front of the world and told the truth." He stepped into the room. "They're threatening to dissolve my ownership. I know. They think you're the reason I'm unraveling." "I'm not," she said. "You are." His jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. She walked to him, placed the brush on the windowsill, and rested her hand over his. "I didn't fall in love with the boardroom. I fell in love with the man who finally let himself feel. Don't crawl back now. Don't make me love a ghost." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tighter than he ever had before, forehead pressed to her temple. "I'm going to lose everything," he whispered. "No," she said. "You're going to trade it." "For what?" "For something real." 2 days later, Sebastian returned to New York for the final time. He didn't walk into a boardroom. He walked into a courtroom. He offered a controlled relinquishing of majority shares in exchange for full autonomy over the new division. He'd proposed a Legion Impact, named after her company, tied legally to both their names, a public merging of their legacy. The board agreed, reluctantly. He walked out with less power and more freedom than he'd ever known. When he came back to Vermont, she met him on the porch.
He didn't speak.
He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. She opened it. An ultrasound. 2 tiny figures. Side by side. "They moved," he said. "While you were sleeping." She looked up at him. And for the first time in her life, Ophelia Carter saw what it meant for a man to choose love without fear. Not with words, but with a life reordered, a name rebuilt, and a future surrendered to something bigger than ambition. She took his hand, and they stepped inside. The snow came late that year. It arrived in silence, coating the Vermont hills in a hush that made everything feel suspended, like time itself had slowed to let the world breathe. Ophelia stood at the upstairs window, one hand resting lightly on her rounded belly, the other curled around a mug of warm cider. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched flakes tumble past the porch light. Behind her, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Sebastian hadn't spoken much since returning from the city 2 days earlier. He'd won the legal battle, retained control over the new foundation, but something had shifted in him. He moved through the rooms like a man carrying a weight too heavy to set down, and she could feel it pressing between them. She set the mug down and walked barefoot through the hallway, her steps muffled by the old pine floor. When she reached the den, She found him sitting near the fireplace, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the flames. "You haven't touched your dinner," she said gently. He didn't look at her. "I couldn't eat. Not hungry, or not ready to stop thinking. I can't tell the difference anymore." She walked over, lowered herself onto the ottoman across from him, and waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. "They offered me a full buyout." She blinked. "What?" "Yesterday. An international firm. They want to absorb everything. Elysian Impact. The Legacy Division. My name." She leaned back slightly. "And they put a number on the table I've never seen before. Enough to walk away from all of it. Forever." She stared at him. "Do you want to?" "I don't know." Ophelia folded her hands over her stomach. "What's stopping you?" He looked at her for the first time that evening. His expression was unreadable. "You." She straightened. "Me? You're the only thing I have that can't be negotiated." She didn't speak. "I let them shape me for so long. The board, the investors, the press. I told myself I was in control, but I was always responding to someone else's idea of who I should be. Then maybe it's time you stop responding." He laughed once, but it was bitter. "You make it sound easy." "I didn't say it was easy. I said it was time." He looked at the fire again. "What if I'm not the man you thought I could become?"
"You already are," she said.
"You just haven't forgiven yourself for the years you weren't." He closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening. "They want an answer by Monday. Then we leave tomorrow." That got his attention. She stood slowly. "There's a property in Savannah. My grandmother's. It's been sitting empty for years. We'll go there. You'll breathe. You'll write your answer with your hands in the soil instead of on a boardroom whiteboard." He stared at her, unmoving. "I'm not asking you to run," she added. "I'm asking you to walk away from noise long enough to hear your own mind." The following morning, they packed only what they could carry. The rest could wait. The house in Savannah was nothing like the glass and steel of New York or the quiet luxury of Vermont. It was weathered and wide, with magnolia trees creaking in the wind and shutters that had seen too many storms. The porch sagged slightly on one side, and the screen door squeaked every time it opened. Ophelia stepped onto the porch first, her hand brushing the faded frame of the front door. "She used to sit right here every evening," she said softly, "with a quilt and a glass of peach tea. She never hurried for anything." Sebastian stood behind her, suitcase in one hand, uncertainty in the other. "Sounds like a woman who had peace." "She did," Ophelia said, "because she stopped trying to impress people who were never going to love her right." Inside, the air smelled like cedar and dried eucalyptus. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting soft shadows across the worn hardwood floors. She led him to the back room, overlooking the garden. "You'll sleep here." He set his bag down. "Where will you?" "In the room across the hall." He looked at her, puzzled. She held his gaze. "We're not here to escape together. We're here to grow separately, so we don't rot together later." That night, she found an old journal of her grandmother's in a drawer beside the bed. As she read, she heard Sebastian moving through the house, opening drawers, pacing the porch, stopping now and then as if listening for something only he could hear. The next morning he was gone. She woke to find the bed untouched, the screen door swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Panic rose in her throat until she spotted him through the kitchen window, bent over in the garden, his hands in the dirt. He was barefoot, shirtless, kneeling in the earth. She stepped outside quietly. He didn't look up. "I found seeds in the shed. Sunflowers, basil, collards. You planting them?" He nodded. "Feels right." She leaned against the porch post. "What are you hoping will grow?" He sat back on his heels. "Discipline. Patience." Maybe the version of me that doesn't flinch every time something isn't under control. She came down the steps, knelt beside him, and placed her hand on top of his soil-covered one. You're doing it already. He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, there was no armor in his eyes. Do you ever regret saying yes? He asked. To you.
To this.
All of it. The moment I walked into your office. The moment I fired you. She shook her head. That wasn't the beginning.
No. No, she said.
The beginning was when you showed up on my doorstep with nothing but honesty in your hands. That was the first real moment. He looked down at their hands, the dirt caked into his knuckles, her fingers resting lightly over his. By the end of the week, the garden had rose. By the end of the month, the first sprouts broke through the soil. One morning, as the sun climbed over the edge of the house, Ophelia woke to a sharp pressure in her lower back. She tried to shift, thinking it was the way she'd slept, but then the pressure returned, this time deeper, more insistent. She moved slowly to the edge of the bed, stood, and felt something give. Water.
Warm.
Rushing. Sebastian, she called, her voice thin. He appeared in the doorway seconds later, eyes wide. It's time, she whispered. He didn't panic. He moved. By the time the midwife arrived, an old friend of her grandmother's, the contractions were steady. The pain came in waves, and Sebastian never left her side, holding her hand through every breath, every cry, every moment she felt like breaking. And then the first cry pierced the room. Then another. 2 voices. 2 lives. The midwife handed them each a baby wrapped in soft cotton blankets, their faces red and wrinkled, their lungs loud. Ophelia looked at Sebastian, and his expression broke wide open, something raw and unguarded she hadn't seen before. 2 daughters, he whispered. She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. He leaned down, kissed her forehead. We'll build everything for them, he said. She looked at him. Not for them. With them. Later that night, as the babies slept in the cradle beside the bed, Sebastian stepped out onto the porch, the screen door creaking behind him. In his hand was a letter. Not to the board. To himself. He unfolded it and read silently. I release the man who feared everything but success. I forgive the boy who thought achievement would keep him from being abandoned. I choose a new legacy. One built slowly. One built in truth. He folded the letter, tucked it into the pocket of his flannel shirt, and looked out at the dark stretch of land beyond the porch. The garden was quiet, but he knew something holy was growing, and this time he wouldn't miss it. The Georgia summer had arrived early, washing over Savannah in a thick, golden heat that clung to everything: the porch rails, the sweetgrass, the cracked sidewalks outside their gate. The magnolia trees sagged with blooms so fragrant they made the air feel heavier. Inside, the house was dim and still, shutters drawn against the sun, only the soft ticking of the hallway clock breaking the silence. Ophelia stood at the vintage sink, rinsing out 2 tiny glass bottles under a stream of cool water. Her wrists ached from the long nights, and her hair was still damp from the quick shower she'd barely managed before one of the girls had stirred. She glanced toward the nursery down the hallway. The twins had finally fallen asleep in their shared cradle, curled toward each other like they'd been born knowing how to find each other in the dark. Sebastian hadn't come inside yet. She wiped her hands dry on a soft towel and stepped out onto the porch. He was there, sitting on the steps, his elbows resting on his knees, his shirt soaked through with sweat from chopping wood. Not for need, more out of habit. He hadn't quite learned how to be still. Ophelia walked down until she stood behind him, her shadow falling over his back. You're avoiding the letter, she said. He didn't turn. I'm not avoiding it. I'm ignoring it. Same thing. He reached for the handkerchief tucked into his back pocket and wiped his brow. I knew they'd send something eventually, he said. But I didn't think they'd go this far. She sat next to him, the heat of the wood warming her legs through the cotton of her dress. They're offering a full re-entry, she said. With conditions. They want me back as a figurehead. Nothing more. Ophelia didn't respond right away. A cicada buzzed somewhere in the trees behind them, loud and insistent. There's a check inside, she said. More than we'll ever need. I don't want their money. But you built that company, she said. You built all of it, from the ground up. Doesn't any part of you want to reclaim it? He finally looked at her. I'm not the man who started that company anymore. And I don't want to become him again just to prove I still can. She studied his face. The tan lines from the garden gloves. The faint burn on his forearm from a recent cooking accident. The man in front of her was no longer made of steel and spreadsheets. He was something softer now. Rooted. Then write them back, she said. Not to accept.
To tell them no.
With your own words. He nodded once, then pushed his feet and disappeared inside. By the time sunset stretched low across the porch, casting orange light through the trees, he returned. Ophelia was rocking one of the twins in her arms. The other was asleep in a woven basket by her feet. Sebastian held a sealed envelope in one hand. I told them I won't return under any circumstances, he said. And that Elysian impact will remain independent. Permanently. She looked up. Was it hard?
No, he said.
It felt like closing a door and not needing to check if it locked. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep and the house had quieted, they lay side by side in bed, legs tangled beneath the cotton blanket. The windows were open, letting in the sound of crickets and the scent of garden soil. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Ophelia whispered, I had a dream last night. He turned his head toward her. What about? About my old office. The one you fired me in. His brow furrowed.
Why?
I don't know. I just remember standing there, watching the glass doors close behind me. And instead of feeling humiliated, I felt free. He reached for her hand under the blanket. That day changed everything. I think it saved me, she said. I was stuck. I just didn't know it. He brushed his thumb over her knuckles. I've been thinking about something. She waited. We should get married. She turned toward him. You already proposed. I mean officially. I want to stand in front of people who matter and say it out loud.
No contracts.
No press. Just us. She smiled. Where?
Here.
In the garden, where it all started over. A warm laugh rose from her chest. You're serious. I want to marry you under the trees, with our daughters watching from the porch swing. She nodded against his shoulder. Then let's do it. The weeks that followed moved quickly, full of small, sacred preparations. Eden arrived with a suitcase full of baby clothes and recipes scrawled on index cards. Sebastian's best friend from college flew down from Maine to help build an archway from reclaimed wood. The neighbors brought over fresh flowers, mason jars, and a string of lanterns to hang between the trees. Word spread slowly Ophelia and Sebastian were getting married. Not with fanfare, but with intention. The morning of the wedding, the sky was soft and overcast, but the rain held back. Ophelia dressed in the back bedroom, the one her grandmother had once used. The mirror was old and slightly warped, but it caught her reflection in a golden slant of light. Her dress was simple linen, sleeveless, with a low back and a row of tiny buttons down the spine. Her hair was pinned loosely, soft curls framing her face. Eden stood behind her, adjusting the lace at her waist. You look like her, Eden whispered. Ophelia met her sister's eyes in the mirror. I feel older than I ever thought I would. Love will do that to you. Sebastian waited at the end of the path, between the garden rows. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark trousers, and bare feet in the grass. The twins sat in a wooden cradle nearby, rocking gently as the breeze moved. When Ophelia stepped into view, he didn't smile. He just breathed, like he'd been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. They stood beneath the archway, surrounded by a half-circle of friends, neighbors, and the sound of the earth itself waking up beneath them.
No officiant. No readings.
Just vows spoken with clarity. I gave up everything I thought I needed to find you, Sebastian said, voice steady. And I'd do it again, without hesitation. I lost everything that made me feel safe, Ophelia said, her voice quiet but certain. And it led me to the only place I ever felt truly seen. He slipped a thin gold band onto her finger. She did the same. Their daughters cooed from the cradle, as if the earth itself had agreed. Later, as the sun dipped low and Edison bulbs flickered to life between the trees, Ophelia leaned against Sebastian under the porch light. The guests had gone. The dishes were washed. Eden was inside rocking one of the girls. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. You know what I realized today? He asked. What? I never really built anything before you. I just stacked bricks. She rested her head on his shoulder. Now you're planting roots. He looked out over the garden, where the basil had grown tall and the sunflowers had begun to lean toward the light. I think we're going to be okay, he said. No, she whispered. We're going to be more than okay. And in the stillness of that night, with nothing left to prove, they stood hand in hand, no longer two people undone by ambition or fear, but one family, whole and deeply home. The first real test of their new life arrived not with drama, but with a quiet envelope in the mailbox beside the road. It was a government seal that caught Ophelia's attention. She opened it slowly, standing barefoot on the porch, while the twins napped and the garden shimmered under the southern heat. She read the document twice before she sat on the porch swing, her fingers tightening around the folded paper. Sebastian found her there 20 minutes later, a half-drunk glass of water beside her, the letter still open on her lap. He sat beside her without asking what it was. After a moment, she handed it to him. He read it, then looked up slowly. Your father's estate? She nodded once. I didn't know there was anything left. He leaned back, the swing creaking under their weight. You never told me much about him. I didn't have much to tell, she said. He left when I was 6. Never sent letters. Never called. Then one day, we heard from a lawyer that he'd passed in Michigan. Sebastian folded the letter, setting it on the small table beside them. Why now? The attorney said he'd been trying to find me for over a year. Apparently, there's a property. A bookstore. He left it to me in his will. He turned his head. What are you going to do? I don't know, she said. I never thought I'd have to care. The swing rocked gently in the breeze. Neither of them spoke. That night, after the twins were asleep and the dishes were drying by the sink, Ophelia pulled down an old photo album from the hallway shelf. She hadn't opened it in years. Pages of fading Polaroids stared up at her, Eden hugging her in the back seat of a beat-up car, their mother carrying groceries with one hand and balancing a toddler with the other. Then she turned a page and found him, her father. A grainy photo of him holding her as a baby, his shirt half tucked, his smile too wide to fake. She closed the album. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen window and watched Sebastian in the garden with the girls. He held one twin in each arm like it was the most natural thing in the world, pointing at the tomato vines and talking to them like they understood every word. She turned away and grabbed the keys. I'm going. Sebastian looked up as she walked across the yard. To Michigan? She nodded. I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know what he left behind. Not the store. Him. He didn't try to talk her out of it. Do you want me to come? No, she said gently. I think I need to do this alone. He studied her for a moment. Then take the truck. It'll ride better than the rental. She kissed his cheek. I'll be back before the weekend. She left before sunrise the next morning. The drive took her through winding hills and long stretches of empty highway, through towns that looked like they'd been forgotten by time. She stopped only for gas and coffee, letting the silence settle around her like a second skin. When she arrived, the town was smaller than she expected. One main street, a few diners, a post office, and the bookstore Reed and Page tucked between an antique shop and a barber. The windows were dusty, the sign faded. She stepped inside and was hit with the scent of old pages and pine. The lights flickered when she turned the switch, but the space held itself together. Rows of worn shelves, a counter with a brass bell, a small reading nook in the back with a lamp still plugged in. A man stepped out from the back hallway. Mid-60s. Thin white hair. Worn eyes. "You must be Ophelia." She nodded. "You worked with my father?"
For 30 years, he said.
He was a complicated man, but he loved this place. Never let anyone else close it, even when the customers stopped coming. She walked through the rows slowly, her fingers trailing titles she hadn't seen in years. Her heart tugged between grief and confusion. In the office, she found a small box labeled her name. Inside, a stack of letters never mailed, all addressed to her, all written in the same looping cursive. She read them one by one, seated in the old leather chair behind the counter. They weren't grand gestures. They were confessions. "I didn't know how to be a father. I was afraid of failing you. I thought silence would hurt less than disappointment. But I think of you every day." She cried quietly, alone in the back office of a place that had held his regrets. That night, she stayed in a small inn above a bakery. She dreamed of him not as the man who left, but as the man who tried, too late, to return. By morning, she knew what needed to happen. She drove back without stopping, arriving just as the sun was setting behind the magnolia trees. The girls were in the kitchen with Eden, and Sebastian was sitting on the porch, waiting. She walked straight to him and didn't speak, just sat in his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. He held her without question. After a long silence, she said, "He left me more than a bookstore." Sebastian nodded against her temple. "He left you the truth." "I'm thinking about keeping it." "The store?" "Yes," she said. "Reopening it. Restoring it. Maybe letting it become a place for others who need to find something they lost." He leaned back to look at her. "Do you want to move there?" "No," she said. "I want to turn it into a sister location. A branch of Elysian. A place where stories and healing meet." He smiled. "Then we do it."
We.
"You think I'd let you rebuild a legacy without me?" She laughed softly. "You'd hate the dusting. I'd love the purpose." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Then let's build it together." The next few months unfolded like a season of sowing. Eden moved into the property for the summer, overseeing the renovation of the bookstore. Sebastian traveled back and forth with the girls, managing the expansion of Elysian Impact, which now included a youth literacy initiative in partnership with the store. Ophelia designed the new space herself. She kept the original shelves but added a children's corner, a writing room, and a wall where visitors could pin notes to people they'd lost or were still waiting to forgive. They named it Read and Root. The opening day drew families, writers, teachers, and more than one person who simply wandered in off the street and stayed for hours. In the back room, above the lamp and chair, Ophelia hung the last letter her father had written her. Framed in walnut. Unopened. She never needed to read it. She already knew the most important part. He saw her. 1 year later, on a warm May morning, Ophelia stood once again in the garden behind the Savannah house, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, watching her daughters chase fireflies across the rows of basil and thyme. Sebastian came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm happy," she whispered. They stood that way for a long time. Then he turned her gently to face him. "I never asked you properly," he said. She frowned. "Ask me what?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small velvet box.
She gasped.
He opened it slowly. Inside was a ring unlike the first. Simpler. A thin gold band with a single sapphire set in the center. "This is the one I should have given you," he said, "when I wasn't trying to fix my fear with diamonds." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. He went to one knee, hands steady. "Ophelia Carter, you didn't just change my life. You rebuilt it, breath by breath. Will you marry me again? This time, not as a promise, but as a covenant." She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered. He stood and slid the ring onto her finger. The twins clapped from the edge of the garden, unaware but joyful. The sun rose higher, the earth turned, and the life they'd built rooted in grace, watered by truth, and grown in the light of redemption blossomed into something neither of them had ever dared to dream. A love that didn't just survive. It made everything whole.